Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Pat.
And I'm Erin.
So, Erin, have you ever done any kind of volunteer or charity work?
Oh, actually, yes, I have.
Some? Surely.
Yeah. I've done a bit of stuff in Taipei, a lot to do with arts, and kind of just making sure that people get art and music in their life, and some theater as well.
That's great. Cool. I've done a few shows where the profits of the show have all gone to a charity, and I've raised money, often by doing silly things, painting all of my body hair bright pink, wearing a clown costume to work on the bus. I figure I'm good at making people laugh, and I have no shame.
There you go.
So therefore, I can use that to
raise money for other people.
Raise money for the people who need it.
Good idea.
Yeah, now we're going to be talking today about a group who they've done something, it's not at all kind of funny. It's very, very serious. And they're working in a very serious situation. They're also doing volunteer work trying to help people. So let's read through the article, find out who they are and what they've been doing. The Syria Civil Defense, better known as the White Helmets, is an all-volunteer organization of Syrians who do their best to care for the civilians suffering in the country's brutal civil war. The group was nominated for the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize, and though it did not receive the award, its humanitarian rescue work has been recognized and praised around the world. Volunteers and rescue organizations have been trying to save and rescue people in Syria since the conflict began. The White Helmets, which mostly works in rebel-held areas, particularly Aleppo, was officially formed in 2014, though many of its members have been working since 2013. Other organizations, such as Mayday Rescue and Turkey's AKUT Search and Rescue Association, have set up programs for Syrian volunteers, training them in emergency medical care and other necessary skills. Today, around 3,000 volunteers, most of whom come from ordinary walks of life, make up the White Helmets. For example, Raed Al-Saleh, who currently heads the group, was an electrical supplies salesman before the war began. So far, the group has saved an estimated 60,000 Syrian lives, but its work is far from over. Rescue work in Syria is an incredibly dangerous task, and over 140 of the White Helmets volunteers have been killed in action. One of the deadliest hazards is barrel bombs, improvised explosive devices dropped from planes and helicopters. The White Helmets has called for the establishment of no-fly zones over parts of Syria, but the United Nations has been powerless to implement them. Though there seems to be no end in sight to the Syrian conflict, the White Helmets will continue to work, braving bombs and bullets to save Syrian civilians wherever it can.
Okay, so the title of our article today is Syrian Rescue Group Nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. Now, we are going to talk about this Syrian rescue group, but before we do, let's talk about the verb nominate, which means to suggest that someone have a position of power or perhaps a prize, an award, or maybe like a duty. Nominate them to be the person who does something particular.
Yeah, it's kind of to put them forward for official consideration.
Right, for something.
Yes.
Now, in this case, they're being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a very big thing for people to be nominated for. It's a very well-known award, and it's quite an honor to receive it.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the title. Now, they were nominated, and we'll kind of get on to the fact that they didn't actually win the prize.
Right.
It would have been a bigger story if we say they had won the Nobel Peace Prize, but they were considered, and there are only a small group of people or groups who have been considered for it, which is a particularly big honor for them. So who is this group? It's a Syrian rescue group. The first sentence of the article gives them their names. The Syria Civil Defense, that's kind of their official name, better known as the White Helmets. So that's their kind of nickname. It's because of the color of the helmets that they wear when they're going out to search and rescue. They're white. So their official name, the Syria Civil Defense, that means they basically defend the people. They're not part of an army. They're not a military defense. They're the civil defense. So they protect civilians. They are civilians. They're not part of a government or military group.
Right. Okay.
So they're known as the White Helmets. That's their name. They're an all-volunteer organization of Syrians who do their best to care for the civilians suffering in the country's brutal civil war.
Okay, well, there's a lot to talk about in that sentence, actually. It's quite a long introduction sentence. So let's talk about this all-volunteer organization of Syrians. Now, we know what they're called and we know what they do, and we're talking about all-volunteer organizations. So we know that they're civil defense. They're not an army. They're not military. They're not the government. They're volunteers. They're just normal Syrian people who want to help people without being paid. They just believe in safety and the rights of other human beings.
That's right.
And so they want to care for the civilians in their country. So to care for means to look after someone who's not always able to take care of themselves. So other people are coming in to look after these people.
Yeah, we could care for an elderly relative who needs help. We care for a small child. We care for a pet. We care for each other, basically, just to help out. And the people they care for are the civilians. Okay, civilian is related to the civil defense, so the people. Civilians are the people of a country, and these civilians are suffering in the country's brutal civil war. So there's another use of the word civil. Here, a civil war means a war within its own country. Different groups within the same country fighting each other. They're not from other countries invading. They are Syrians fighting Syrians. I mean, yes, there are a lot of other nationalities there fighting on both sides, I believe.
Right.
But here we've got a civil war. It's a war between a country's people.
Right. Okay, so let's take a look at the word brutal. It's an adjective, and we're using it to describe the civil war in this sentence. Now, brutal is very cruel, very violent, so there will be a lot of death in this war. And as many of you probably know by paying attention to the news, there have been quite a lot of civilian deaths in this war, a lot of regular citizens of the country dying.
Yes, most wars are brutal in a way, but using this word kind of describes it as people are not caring whether they blow up civilians or hurt normal people as part of the war.
That's true.
In some wars, there is an effort to go, okay, no civilian targets. We'll try and fight the fighters on the other side, but leave the people alone. We're saying it's brutal because they really don't care.
Right. So they're attacking everybody, not just the other soldiers and fighters.
Okay, so the article goes on. The group was nominated for the 2016 Nobel Prize, as we said in our title. And though it did not receive the award, its humanitarian rescue work has been recognized and praised around the world. Okay. Here we're talking about humanitarian. Humanitarian concerns are basically about human welfare, looking after people, ordinary people, whoever they happen to be, not political, not idealizing one side or another side, government or rebel, this group, that group. It's looking after the people. Basically.
Right. And a lot of it has to do with, especially in like major humanitarian, it means improving the bad sort of conditions that people live in. So working with the people to improve their lives. So you see a lot of stuff like this after earthquakes where humanitarian groups come in, they build shelters, they offer medical care, stuff like this.
Yeah, they're trying to get, clean water supplies, food, medical supplies, that sort of thing. Now, they were nominated, this group. They didn't win. The guy who actually won it was the Colombian president who was making the deal to try and end their civil war in Colombia. So, it's no disgrace not to win when somebody else who's saving hundreds and thousands of lives trying to end a war wins. But they got recognized and praised and got lots of attention.
Which is a very good thing, and they should be getting a lot of attention because what they're doing is really dangerous. And even a nomination for the Peace Prize is quite big news.
And it means they're going to be brought into more global focus. People will hear of them, try and help them with donations, more training, try to stop kind of ignoring the Civil War and do something about it. So that's why it's important.
Okay, well, we continue in the next paragraph, which starts with volunteers and rescue organizations have been trying to save and rescue people in Syria since the conflict began. Now, if we go back a few years, the Civil War in Syria began in 2011. So since then, all of these different groups, the White Helmets, other groups we'll talk about in a bit, have been trying to save the people of Syria, maybe get them out of the dangerous cities, find a place for them in other countries, things like that.
Again, food, medical supplies, stopping the fighting, and so on. Now, the White Helmets, the article says, which mostly works in rebel-held areas, particularly Aleppo, was officially formed in 2014, though many of its members have been working since 2013. So this group has kind of formed as the war's gone on. They got together, they started trying to help people, they became official. They mostly work in rebel-held areas, so these are areas of the country that are held by the rebel groups, the people who are fighting against the Syrian leader, the Syrian government. So they're trying to work with them, but they will help others as well. They don't only help the rebels.
And that has a lot to do with their humanitarian rescue work. The idea is to help humans and to make sure that everybody has clean water and all these things that they need.
Yeah, because civilians who are on the other side get affected as well.
Exactly.
So they're completely happy with trying to help them. But because the rebel areas are getting bombed a lot more, their work is needed more there.
In those areas.
Particularly the city of Aleppo.
Okay. Well, other organizations such as Mayday Rescue and Turkey's AKUT Search and Rescue Association have set up programs for Syrian volunteers, training them in emergency medical care and other necessary skills. Now, we talked about these other organizations, so we've listed two here, Mayday Rescue and the AKUT Search and Rescue Association from Turkey, a neighboring country. And they're doing what they can to sort of help the White Helmets and the other Syrian volunteers, maybe civilian volunteers who are looking to help. So they've set up these programs, or they've started these official programs with training. And they teach them different kinds of things, such as medical care, especially emergency medical care.
Yeah, that's dealing with people who have suffered wounds. There's been an explosion and someone has been hurt. So they need to be dealt with right there. They can't be taken to a hospital. They need to be dealt with on the spot or they might die.
Right.
So that's the emergency care. And other necessary skills are things like hunting through destroyed buildings to try and find people who are trapped. It could be moving through particular areas, even negotiation, setting up clean water supplies, all of those kinds of things. The article then says today, around 3,000 volunteers, most of whom come from ordinary walks of life, make up the White Helmets. Your walk of life basically kind of means your job, your career, and your background, kind of what you do. So ordinary walks of life means just regular people.
Right.
We're not talking about these guys aren't made up of only doctors or ex-soldiers or professionals. They're just ordinary people, sellers, people who worked in offices, people who farmed the land. Could be anything.
Right.
That's what we mean by ordinary walks of life, ordinary careers. And they make up the White Helmets. They are the group that is the White Helmets. Okay, we're going to take a short break right now. We'll be back in a few minutes to continue with our article. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we've been talking about some of the people who make up the White Helmets.
And we just learned that they come from ordinary walks of life. So they're quite normal people in society, people who might be booksellers or work in an office, sort of things like that. So we're going to go to a specific example of one of these people. It says, for example, Raid al-Saleh, who currently heads the group, was an electrical supplies salesman before the war began. Now, let's talk about this job that he has.
Yeah.
We see the word electrical supplies salesman. So electrical is basically relating to anything that is powered by electricity. And he's a salesman, which means he sells these products, this equipment.
Yeah,
so
it could be TVs and computers, photocopiers, could just be wires and cords and things you plug into the wall, just any kind of electrical gear.
Right.
Really.
Perhaps he has a small shop that he sells things out of, or maybe he's like
He runs a 3C store, basically. Something like that. But now he is the head, the leader of this group. He's leading the people and leading the training and organizing them and so on. Now, so far, the group has saved an estimated 60,000 Syrian lives. So they're not counting. That's why we use the word estimated. They're guessing. They can make a good idea of how many, and it's somewhere around the 60,000 mark. Could be a few hundred more or less. It's not important. We're just saying around 60,000, an estimated 60,000. However, its work is far from over.
Right. I mean, the Syrian civil war is not getting better anytime soon, and they still have a lot of work to do. There are still bombs dropping and still explosions happening. So they still have quite a lot of work to do. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the kind of work they're doing. It says rescue work in Syria is an incredibly dangerous task, and over 140 of the White Helmets volunteers have been killed in action. So, as we know, it's quite dangerous. There are a lot of bombs. There's a lot of gunfights. There's a lot of people being injured here in this war, being injured and dying. And unfortunately, the rescue workers are being injured and dying as well. So, as it says, at least 140 of these White Helmet volunteers have been killed.
Yeah, which is terrible because they're just trying to help. They're not on one side or the other. They are just doing their best to help people. Now, one of the deadliest hazards, so one of the things that kills them, is barrel bombs. So let's talk about the word deadliest first. Something that is deadly is extremely dangerous and very likely to cause death.
Right.
A deadly car crash would be one in which probably several people died.
Yes.
If a snake has a deadly bite, it's going to kill you if it bites you. That kind of thing.
Not a nice thing to think about.
Not at all.
No.
So these are very deadly things. And I'm sure in a war zone you'd face hundreds of deadly things. But one of the most is these barrel bombs. Now, we also looked at the word hazard.
All right. So we're talking about these deadly things. A lot of times deadly things are actually called hazards. And a hazard is something that is probably going to be dangerous or cause a lot of problems or cause accidents of some sort. So if a road maybe has a pothole in it and your car drives into it, you'd call that a hazard. It might cause damage to your car. Okay, so like a hazard is something dangerous, and the specific one that we're talking about here is barrel bombs.
Yeah, barrel bombs, you can read about these online, and I don't suggest watching any videos because it's probably pretty horrible. We all know a bomb is something that blows up, and a barrel is a large container, which you can put things in and seal up the top. The second clause in this sentence explains exactly what barrel bombs are. They are improvised explosive devices dropped from planes and helicopters.
Right.
So again, we've got a few words to try and explain what these barrel bombs actually are. First, we know they are improvised. That means you don't go out and buy them from a store, or they're not made in a factory. They're just basically made by people. They get a box or a crate or an actual real barrel, and they stuff it with things that will blow up and cause a lot of damage.
Right. So basically anything they can find.
Yeah,
maybe
it's
they'll
homemade.
Right. They'll put maybe some nails inside, maybe some screws, and different kinds of tools that, like, once the explosion happens, those things fly out and they cause a significant amount of damage.
Worst of all, some of them actually use chemicals.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so which would, it could be gas or acid or stuff that just kills people through its chemistry as well. So it's anything that they make up and they put it together. And it's explosive.
Right, so explosive is what happens when something explodes. So, like, bombs explode. So when the pressure is too great inside from the mechanisms that are kind of keeping this bomb together, they kind of burst out and cause a huge flame or for things to come flying out of it.
That's right. It releases, it could be energy, could be whatever has been inside it. Fireworks are explosive, mostly harmless unless you do something stupid with them. But they are explosive, and they're also devices. A device is just a thing that does something. It's the thing made for a purpose.
Right.
In this case, its purpose is exploding, unfortunately, and killing a lot of people.
Right.
So basically, the idea is they get a barrel, a crate, they fill it with, could be chemicals, explosives, gunpowder, petrol, gas, all this stuff, and then they fly up in the air with it on a plane or a helicopter, and they just drop it out of the back.
Right.
A helicopter, of course, is a type of flying vehicle. It's got the big rotating blade on top and also on the tail, and they don't need to take off with a runway. They can just go straight up and down. They can fly from side to side. You see them in war. You see police helicopters using them, and so on.
Okay, so there are certain things in war that you can do to sort of avoid these things from happening. And it kind of explains that a little bit in the next sentence. It says, the White Helmets has called for the establishment of no-fly zones over parts of Syria, but the United Nations has been powerless to implement them. So here we're talking about the establishment of no-fly zones. So a no-fly zone is an area over a city or over a country where no one is allowed to fly. And it particularly happens during times of war. So right now in Syria, they're trying to stop people from flying over the country so that they can't drop these explosives. And so they're calling for the establishment. And so they're trying to get this started. They're trying to start this.
Yeah, get it officially approved of for for countries or organizations to declare there is no flying over this area unless you have the right clearance, and they're trying to get them to actually start that, to set these up, like the phrase set up we saw earlier.
Right.
And the White Helmets are calling for this. That means they're saying this needs to happen. They're saying it in front of governments. They're getting their friends to kind of go public. They're writing about it in newspapers and magazines, wherever they can, and just saying, set up a no-fly zone. That's what we need. Establish, create these no-fly zones, which is, of course, great. Unfortunately, as the second clause of the sentence says, but the United Nations has been powerless to implement them. Them, in this case, meaning the no-fly zone. So implement just means to put a plan or a decision or something like that into effect.
Right.
Kind
so
of, okay,
like an official thing.
Yeah, and it means we've already made the plan. Now we have to actually do it.
Right.
So in the same way that a government or a president, they would create a new law, they'd pass the new law, then they have to implement it. They have to make sure everybody follows it. They have to tell everyone about it. They have to create plans to make sure it happens.
Right.
And the United Nations, the group, the UN, they have been powerless to actually do this.
Right. So powerless is obviously without power. We know that less means to not have or to have less of. And so they haven't been able to do this. They haven't been able to use the power that the United Nations usually has to make these no-fly zones happen.
Yeah, the reason for that is because Syria, the government of Syria, is allied with Russia. Russia is on the 5-person Security Council of the UN, which means they have the veto vote, which means that if anybody makes a decision, Russia or one of the other 4 countries could just say, no, we're blocking it. And because Russia is allied with Syria, they're vetoing, they're blocking these decisions.
Okay, so a lot of complicated issues.
It is. It's not as easy as it might just sound to say set up the zone. I mean, we could talk whole other articles worth of stuff about the UN, the Security Council, and the problems it has. That's maybe another article topic for another time. Right now, we just need to say they can't get it done. They can't get these no-fly zones set up.
Well, the article continues. We're coming up in the end here. We've got quite a long sentence. It says, though there seems to be no end in sight to the Syrian conflict, the white helmets will continue to work, braving bombs and bullets to save Syrian civilians wherever they can. Now, quite a lot to talk about in that sentence as well. It says there seems to be no end in sight. So, unfortunately, it appears that this conflict is going to keep going for some time. We can't tell when it will stop or when things will start to kind of improve or even when the war will end. There's no end in sight. We can't see when it's going to end.
Yeah, because one phase of the conflict might end, but another one will spring up. A rebel group might surrender, but then there are more.
Right.
Islamic State are in Syria, of course, complicating the issue with what they're doing. So it appears, as far as we can tell, the fighting will just keep going.
Right.
However, despite all this, the white helmets are going to continue to work, and they're going to brave bombs and bullets. Now, normally we see the word brave as an adjective.
That's right.
Someone who's brave, they do difficult or scary things. They show courage in the face of danger. But here we're using to brave something as a verb. You brave this, which means you kind of ignore the danger or you accept that there's a danger, but you do it anyway.
Right.
So you could brave, a water where you know there might be sharks. You could brave a jungle where you know there are dangerous animals.
Even dangerous mosquitoes, maybe.
Indeed, yeah. So here they know that they're going to work in areas where they're going to get bombed, they're going to get shot at. It's extremely dangerous, but they're braving the bombs. They're saying, yeah, they happen. We're just going to have to keep going. We're not going to let these dangers stop us.
Right.
So that is how you brave something.
And they're not just braving the bombs, they're also braving the bullets. We know that there are lots of guns in war these days, and the bullets are the pieces of the gun that go inside and then get shot out of the gun and end up in unfortunate places.
Yeah, the ammunition, the little missiles, the little sharp things. You'll see bullets, of course, all over action movies, TV shows, and so on. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with how those work. Right. Well, that is the end of our article for this month, our News Digest, talking about a particularly important piece of news. Although, as you guys can probably tell, as we've talked about this, we've sort of referred to or mentioned lots of other related news stories, issues, things that complicate this. So there's a lot out there for you guys to go and read and learn more about, find out about all these issues and learn kind of what's happening in the world. And maybe if you want to do something good or try and find a way to help out if you can.
Right. So this could be quite an encouragement to other people around the world. How can I help?
How can I help?
Yeah. So there's a lot of prevalent stuff in the news these days about Syria, about the UN, and about these peace prizes. And it's worth looking into. So take some time to go on the internet, find some real news to read, and make sure it's not that fake news these days.
Nope.
And just do a little bit of reading about it and learn and maybe find a way for you to help.
Exactly. Okay, that's all we got time for today. For English Digest, I'm Pat.
And I'm Erin.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.